Okay, so you're thinking.
You can say what you want now.
Yes, true, exactly, because I keep recommending.
Maybe in a bad spot.
Well, do you want
We
to?
can curve, let's curve.
It's fine.
I can pick my neck.
You can make it distinguishable.
That's better. All right, so I want to welcome everyone. Many of you were here last night, and today is a little follow-up conversation to further tease out some of the ideas that we hope our show engages. If you were not here, I would just introduce myself as Stuart, the artistic director of the Contemporary. This is Regine Basha, who is the co-curator of the exhibition, and Nina Katchadourian, who's one of the participating artists, who's in from New York. And so what we thought we would like to do today is just talk a little bit about the origins of the show, make this more of a conversation at some point potentially, and maybe I would just sort of throw a question that was asked of Regine and I last night over to Regine, which was someone who was here said the title substitute teacher is very provocative, and they walked through the show and he said, I think I really understand it. What would you have called this exhibition if you didn't call it substitute teacher? And so I wonder whether you would chew on that for a minute.
Well, I didn't have an immediate answer. I thought about the fact that substitute teacher in itself, though it's a title, it's maybe not necessarily like a theme kind of title. It's more like a condition. We keep talking about that. And so when he asked me that, I thought, okay, well, there's so many various threads and themes that run through the show and that cross over, and it's very hard to talk about the show being about something, or the works being about something. It's more like what they're doing, or how they inhabit, where they are, the space, or the position of the artists, and how they approach what they're doing. So maybe, if anything, substitute teacher is an approach rather than a title, I'd say. So that is my answer to that question. I don't know if there's an alternate.
Well, I think it was a title that we had from the beginning. I mean, in a way, the show started with the title, because it's a phrase that we've talked about for a long time in discussions, and we liked what it conjured. We liked the idea that it had a certain attitude or approach embedded in it, right? We all remember that moment when you're in school and the substitute teacher walks in the room and you know immediately that something is not normal. And so the person doesn't know the class, they don't know the people by name, they may be ill-prepared to do the lesson plan,
And you wonder what you can get away with.
Yeah.
That's what I remember thinking.
Yeah, so it's an opportunity for the students to kind of take over the class. It's an opportunity for the substitute teacher to surprise the students. So it becomes almost like a leveling point where, the hierarchies are in question, the authority is in question, the beliefs are in question, everything is just a bit topsy-turvy.
And so maybe it also implies that something can happen which could be both troubling or troublesome, but also could be a wonderful break from the norm. If you have a teacher you're not particularly thrilled with, the sub might also be this wonderful opportunity for another impression or another point of view. And so,
but really, it's rather, I guess, there's the issue of the figure and the authoritative figure, but really, I think what got us going as we were engaging with the works and the artists in the show is the various modes and possibilities of learning, and how we began to realize that obviously you learn and absorb information and often in situations that are not set up for you to learn. Oftentimes it's it's kind of in between the cracks of things. So that was our guideline for how we wanted to select some of the works for the show. Is this idea of not only learning in alternative ways, let's say, but also like unlearning what you know, or questioning your own assumptions about what you think you know. Do you really know what you know? All these ideas about how you retain information, where it comes from, and So these are some things we'll hash out today, I think, as we go through some of the
I
works.
think those were some of the backdrop to the organizing of the show. Something that should also be said is that this train of thought is not operating in a vacuum, that in the last several years, specifically, the last couple, in a very focused way, there has been a lot of art world and academic discourse about the nature of institutions, art institutions, museums, art centers, what they present and what is their pedagogical function. So to some degree, we are also hoping that the notion of a substitute teacher show embedded in this art center potentially really foregrounds the idea of the institution as an educational facility. That the show, in a sense, becomes the classroom, the institution potentially becomes the school, following this metaphor, the artists are the teachers, or the object are the teachers. And so those are sort of structures we thought are also part of a possibility. But in the last couple of years, and you have been attending several of these things, maybe you could just put the context of, United Nations.
Well, just quickly, there's an article on the bulletin board that extends, elaborates on this phenomenon. It's come from the artist community, if anything else. It's been like an artist-driven initiative, maybe, in which various collectives or, let's say, after graduate school, or artists have taken it upon themselves to form their own learning centers, and they're not necessarily official schools, but they resemble maybe residency programs that have more of a structure to them, and maybe the class structure takes place in other areas, like in bars or outside or while hiking or in a basement of somebody's house, this kind of thing. And they're akin to like the DIY movement of knitting circles, and I think they come out of mainstream stuff too, just getting together, and it's just like a chat room almost phenomena. But it's all about like questioning the art school itself and its structure, and your relationship to art teachers and so on. So a lot of them are kind of, and whether this works or succeeds or achieves is not really, I don't even know, it's still early. I don't know what it all exactly means, other than just getting together and like sharing interests and doing performance pieces on the spot and that kind of thing. It's almost like improv for the improv art school, and also, Nina, you've been witness to this kind of stuff going on too. So that's been like in the background of how we're thinking about, the ideas behind the show. We've been like watching these groups doing this and wondering, why this phenomena is happening.
I think the logic of a lot of those projects is that, not only the teacher has something to teach, the students also might have something to teach, the other students and the teacher. And as any of you who have ever taught know, there's nothing like having to teach something to actually make you feel responsible for learning it. So there's an interesting way in which that kind of cycles around, I think, in projects like that.
Right.
I was just in Clarksville, Tennessee with Hope Ginsberg, who's an artist who is doing a project called Sponge, where there are a whole lot of components to this project, but one thing she did with the students at the art school where we were was she had them all do a 5-minute presentation on something they were an expert on, and they got to decide what that was, and they got to do these sort of micro presentations, and it does really force you to sort of formulate something, and as we were talking about over breakfast, often figure out why something's important to you when you have to articulate it or put it into words or make an artwork about it. That's something as a maker of artworks I often think about, because there are things that I sometimes start without a clear idea of why exactly I'm making them, and the project by way of making them is to find that out. So I think there's a weird way in which education can kind of, and teaching can kind of be almost this like internal loop that you have going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the notion of it chose you. Wondering, like either you choose a subject that sometimes like it chose you and you know nothing about it, and then you have to learn about it.
It's your homework.
Yeah, or being the perpetual student.
There's also I think there's also a series of, as we were trying to do, maybe, and this is maybe part of just a curatorial sensibility which we share, and I think all of us have been in projects or organized projects that try to reiterate, and I guess this is a kind of professorial point of view in this regard. What makes a good class? What makes a good syllabus? What makes a good exhibition? I mean, we particularly have been doing projects over the years independently, which often put together artists of several generations, artists of very different sensibilities. Certainly most of the shows that you've curated, and I know a lot of the group shows or thematic shows that I've curated, constantly mix video and painting and drawing and garment and installation. And so in a way that this was another show that seemed absolutely essential, that it had a range of different kinds of objects that engaged different sorts of subjects from multiple attitudes, mostly that in some cases use humor to great effect or are poached from various public sources. And so a lot of the works, I think, or our attempt was to really mix and make, in a sense, a very interactive works that seem to comment on the other works by virtue of where we've installed them, so that the classroom, in quotes, has a lot going on in it, you know.
Well, I mean, I think it's always hard in a group show because it's sometimes the first time you see the work of an artist and you see only one or two works, and yet, like in the case of Nina, I told her last night, we could have had like 10 works of yours in this show because she's done a lot in relationship to, what we're calling the substitute teacher, but really this, there's always the challenge of really like narrowing down the representatives and the bookmarks, let's say, of ideas that have been developed over 10 years, where there's trajectories that arrive at this work. So, I would just encourage everyone, there's to get to know what else these artists have done or what they can represent as well.
You want to talk about we've been using this phrase that we happily borrowed from artist Daniel Basha, who's in the show, and for many of you who saw his show here a few years ago. In conversation with him a couple of months ago in New York, he used this phrase, the apprentice syndrome, and he was using it to speak about himself, but also a very wide range of artists, many of whom are in the show, and I think Nina would certainly be one of those people, whose practices involve ideas that force them to wander into areas where they need to now go do research or need to now become students in a very particular way. I mean, Danielle Roney, whose sound piece is off right now, who's obviously here.
That's a great example.
You want to just briefly say what the piece, what it forced you to have to do?
Well, we decided that I would learn Arabic, and so the action of learning it was an artistic action with deeper meaning being pursued through the research of Arabic women writers, contemporary and historical, speaking from a voice of exile or migration. So there's this deeper purpose to the learning, but the learning itself became a physical element, language as barrier, and created this kind of spatial phenomenon in itself as a texture of the process.
Yeah, and there are other works in the show. Paul Ramirez Jonas, for example, his 50 state summits, so that these works become, in that case, Paul's attempt to climb all of the highest mountains in the United States. And if you see the work inside, you'll see the ones that's done, you'll see the ones that are remaining to be done. He will be coming to Georgia to climb Brasstown Bald Mountain as part of the reason that we chose, and he equally could have had several works that would have been easily absorbed into this show, because he is one of these kinds of artists. But we thought, again, here's the show, creating an opportunity for Paul to come to Georgia to actually continue experiencing his sense of personal geography, and so what does it mean to study geography in school versus what does it mean to research what these mountains are and find opportunities to go climb them in most cases climbing them solo, but in some cases climbing them with friends. And so those moments become very different learning opportunities. Might you speak a little bit about your relationship?
I love Daniel's term. I'm going to hijack that thing, apprentice syndrome. And the second I heard it, I thought, it's very resonant for me. And I mean, I've always had a kind of hybrid practice. The question when people say to me, oh, you know, you're an artist, what do you do? Is always a sort of point in conversation where I have to make a few decisions about how much do they really want to know, how long should this explanation be. But I've never worked in any one medium. It's always for me been this case of, I describe it as pick the right tool for the right job. So, you know, the project dictates how, the concept or the idea dictates how the thing should be made. It's about figuring out the right form for it. Sometimes for me that means it's a video, sometimes it's a photograph, sometimes it's a sculpture, other times it might be a performance. Sound, music has started coming into things lately too, so it's very varied that way. But art for me has always been, this term of sort of artist, the job description of artist has for me always been the alibi or the umbrella under which I can go and do all the different things that I want to do. So I get to go where I want to, you know, places I'm curious about, people I want to meet, things I want to research. All of this is sort of, it's a very convenient term, it's turned out. So yeah, I think about it, the job that way, I guess. And I'm not the kind of person who's had, I mean, there are many artists who work this way too, of course, where they sort of pick up maybe one medium and painting, let's say, and they sort of explore within a very specific question certain possibilities of that. I studied with a teacher I studied with the artist Alan Capro in graduate school, who had himself studied with John Cage and sort of inherited this definition from Cage of what is an artist, and which I sort of have also hijacked because I really like this as a definition. And it sort of is the idea that an artist is someone who pays attention, or that paying attention is a way of defining maybe what art kind of is or does. And I really like that. I think it's a very useful and usable definition because you can apply that to someone, let's say, who's doing extremely a certain kind of concise inquiry of painting or form or color or things like that. Or you could apply it to someone like, who works more like me, where I think the job is to be alert to what it is in the dumb everyday stuff that surrounds me that there might be more to it. There might be something in that can be opened up and explored and expanded into something else.
We did, I mean, to pick up on this, I think that's exactly what it is in one way or another. We did a show a few years ago with Judy Lynn, who's a photographer, and when I asked Judy, like, what does she think she's doing? She said, I'm pointing.
That's great.
Basically,
yeah.
that's what my job is. My job is to sort of say, pay attention to this.
Right.
Look at the light on this tree.
Right.
Isn't this dog funny? Whatever you know, that in a sense, that is exactly what it's what it's doing. The work is a reminder to.
So the trick, I think, is to catch yourself in the act of paying attention, to pay attention to what you're paying attention to, and to kind of figure out why it is that you might be fixated on a certain thing. And then, of course, the secondary part of the job is figuring out an interesting way to point that out to other people. And therein comes sometimes the part that I get really stuck with. You know, here's this thing, I can't stop thinking about it, but how do you turn this into something that someone else might want to think about or look at?
But alternately, because you said also that it could be, it makes me think of someone like Ryan Detmer. He's here.
He left for
That's right,
the Color Arts Center.
Oh, right, this morning, right. Where, you know, it's a physical carving through a book, you know, that gets him to pay attention to what the contents of that book is and how it all overlaps in a kind of like three-dimensional way. And so, I mean, I learned about his work through this show. I didn't know about his work before, and I love how the dimensionality of that, like, you know, has relationship to what you're saying conceptually, but maybe we would not be thinking about that necessarily if he hadn't been amongst all of these other artists too. So the way things contaminate ideas.
Or time would say, you know what, it's no big deal for me to carve through a block of encyclopedias because we don't use encyclopedias in the same way that we did at one time. So that, I mean, I think in part his choice of, Matthias, back to your point, and there's some other works we could talk about in the show that are very specific in this way. The carving of what might be obsolete in our current mode, a dictionary which is constantly expanding online, or, you know, to our earlier point, you know, is Google the new encyclopedia, or is the immediate access to the web something which renders you know, a Encyclopedia Britannica, which maybe many of you remember, like buying or thinking you had to keep buying every couple of years because when you had one set, you knew inherently it was like incomplete. As soon as you were reading it, it was almost incomplete. And so I think in part his material choice is so rich because it's bringing with it also that potential outdatedness. I think I was explaining to someone last night the Larry Miller piece, Score, which I think if you're saying, oh, how is Larry going to make a work about several things, but you know, using the 10 Commandments. Well, what do you make a work about what do you make a work that deals with the 10 Commandments out of? And so, or Louise Canitzer, what do you make a work that deals with statements of death row inmates? What do you make that work with? Do you picture them on the way to death row? Do you imagine that a photograph might capture their internal state in a way that language might be way more effective at doing that? Does Larry's stone tablets with his amended relationship to the commandments, which ones he's adhered to, which ones he's dismissed, you know, would it be the same thing if he wrote the commandments out? No, because like by just listing the numbers, they force you to go, how many people in the room remember who in the room knows what the third commandment is? Right? And so I don't know that we do either, so we should all like collectively either feel bad together
Does no one know? Does really no one know?
Jerry, you don't know? Jerry, come on, I'm putting all our faith in you, Jerry.
What's the third one?
The third commandment.
Exactly the issue. Who can say them in order? I was saying,
I said thou shalt not.
And I said, well, it could be thou shalt. It might be honor thy father and thy mother.
Right.
We don't
Jennifer,
remember
it's on the
what order
bulletin
they
board,
come in.
actually.
We
It's on
can't take the Lord's name in vain.
Is that the third?
Yeah, it's on the bulletin board.
He did it.
You shall not take the name of the Lord your God.
Dana Thacker gets a gold star. She gets a gold star. She gets a gold star. That's right, you get an encyclopedia. But what's so interesting is that by making that a list of numbers instead of making the commandments visible, he forces you to think about, do you know the commandments and do you know them in order? And so if you say, wow, he did not adhere to number 7, what's number 7? This is now a totally different operating system. And so I think a lot of the works in the show have that built-in choice, which you speak about as maybe a quandary at times, very specifically. What should it be made of, and how does what it's made of impact its delivery?
I think what's left out is a big one for this show. I mean, we were talking about negative space, you and I. It was like so much happens in negative space, and I think what we were kind of getting at there is that, you know, a lot of the works here are not explainable in the sense that, you know, they're giving you just this much, and then what's left out is sort of you're filling in the gaps with what you're assuming or what you're trying to, you know, kind of, and in your process of trying to arrive at the meaning of this work, you arrive at your own meaning of many things based on where you come from, who you are, what you think, you know, all kinds of things.
I was going to say
That's
something
very
about
important.
Brian's work, which we were talking about last night, and I didn't know this about his process, which is that he doesn't really know what he's going to find when he starts carving away at the book. And that was sort of a really big bit of information for me imagining his process, that there's all this uncertainty around the process. It's I like that paradox. These works look so controlled and perfectly sort of made in a way, but it's actually full of all this decision-making and maybe indecision in moments and uncertainty in moments. And I've been thinking a lot through this show. It's been a really good opportunity to kind of think about what the role of uncertainty is alongside knowledge. And one thing I'm very fond of by way of starting points for artworks are situations where I am deeply confused about something or have drastically misunderstood something. And I think that for me has been also a very useful thing to pay attention to, moments when I'm getting something absolutely, utterly, completely wrong. I made a piece a few years ago called Natural Car Alarms that was the result of standing in a jungle in the Caribbean where I was on a residency, believe it or not, and hearing a bird that I mistook for a car alarm, which was a really ridiculous thing to think that sound was. But what happened was that I loved this error, and I loved what it said about the cross-wiring of this urban environment with this kind of natural environment, and that became a piece where I redesigned car alarms to use bird sounds. So it was a way of kind of taking this mistake and ingraining it. And there are a lot of other incidents like that where moments of deep kind of getting it wrong are actually, I think, very fruitful, creative opportunities for artwork. So.
Or it's like where truth lies in fiction. I mean, you find truth in fiction
In
probably
error.
more fixed
Yeah.
than in real life, because there's always different opinions and positions about real life, but fiction is written and it's there. It's likely. I mean, the Walid Rag piece in the beginning on this flat screen there, where he recounts a figure who basically documents in his own way the history of the Lebanese civil wars, but it's kind of an undocumenting, because what is purported to be happening is that he's exposing the camera every time he hears that the civil war has ended. And so the backstory of all of this, once you sort of get to know Walid Rad and the Atlas Group, is, in fact, the entire thing is a fiction. There is no Dr. Fakouri. The whole thing was invented. It's a narrative piece, a literary piece, in fact. But it was Walid's way of actually, charging your sort of mind about the Lebanese civil wars without explaining it to you or telling it to you, or it's not a documentary. It's not a, So
Well, I
I think it's a
think-
very emotional
And
point of
he's,
view from a very dry
I
area.
know you and I've talked, I know I've talked to him over the years about how to try to, and this is again what road you choose that you think will be effective. Walid, in terms of talking about how to wrap your mind around making work about war and social conflict and real crisis that affects people's day-to-day living and trauma, has really, I think, said that the only way that he could sort of deal with some of that is to create a kind of fiction which allows one, so that piece which is the doctor is a fake, the exposed moments where he feels optimistic and hopeful that the war has ended, and so he's flipping his camera on for a moment. The hope is real. Everything else is fake. You know what I mean? There's another wonderful piece about a guard who is supposed to watch this particular stretch of walkway along the beach. It's a particular place where social and political dissidents and anarchists and people sort of meet. And this guy is in a little tower, and what he's supposed to do is just watch, to train his camera on the movements of these people for surveillance. And at some point he gets so bored by the movements of the people that he films the sunset every night. And so it's a piece which speaks to like the desire for human poetry, or the desire for some kind of transformative, optimistic something that would make you feel anything other than the kind of despair of an ongoing political struggle. And there, I think that notion of his construction of the world that's the proper voice to try to address these things is extremely beautiful. And I think a lot of the artists in the show are of the either generation or temperament where their idea about how to tackle various subjects have been, are really post a certain medium. They're conceptual artists who sort of work on projects, and those projects dictate the terms of everything, the terms of material, all of that. Were there other works in the show that you wanted to try to tease out a little?
Well, the loose counter is another, on that train of thought that when information is there but also not there, I mean, there's various tropes I was writing down, like these kinds of, through a formal sort of treatment, you can arrive at the conceptual idea. And for instance, when there's too much information, or when information is withheld, or when information is repeated and then transgressed, or so I feel like, taking a bird's eye view of the show, there's a lot of like, how do you use and abuse and misread information, and it's about the delivery of it and the receiving of it. And so with Luis's last words, it doesn't say, there's no point in the piece that says who the voice is, what you're reading, and it's not on the label either. But it's a lot about love and longing and missing and blessings and so on. And, it's just interesting that, one can approach it knowing the information that it's from death row inmates, or not knowing and just sort of receiving this incredible onslaught of love and affection. So it becomes like almost, it has impact on you, regardless of knowing or not knowing.
I want to pick up on the thing that you just said, because you mentioned the label, and we were talking about this almost from the moment that we started to install the show. I know Jennifer and Stacy and the interns here. I mean, we usually do something, and we try to do it with the right tone, which is when we do labels, and we often do labels. Other than just the facts, ma'am. This is by Mira Shore. It's an oil on canvas. This is when it was made. We, mostly me writing, but often try to have a delivery of some content for the viewer that might be helpful. So for example, we struggle, one might have done a label for Brody Condon's video, which is right behind this wall, which is a collection of YouTube video clips of people describing their psychedelic drug trips. And so what you have and I sort of think of this in the realm of, some of the work in the show is book smart. I would say that Brody's is street smart or experiential in the way that, one way of learning is in the classroom, another way of learning is like out in the world. And so he obviously grabbed all of these pieces from YouTube, and it would be a very typical thing for us to do is for me to write a wall label that says, these videos were grabbed by Brody from YouTube, and they show this happening. Not saying anything else about what I think that means particularly, but just identifying the thing. These texts come from the Texas, penal system's website of death row inmates, and Luis picked them all because they have the word love in them, and that's how that came to be. We really talked a lot about how much or how little information should be in this exhibition, and if so, where it should be. And I think we sort of came to the idea in this case, especially because I think the show tries to address knowledge or information or ways in which you absorb all of these things. When we erred on the side of less information in the physical room and more to the point of putting that material on a bulletin board, which we'll continue to sort of tease out, and sort of using the schoolroom metaphor to sort of say, well, maybe there's a bunch of other places where the syllabus and the cliff notes and the study guide sort of exist, but they don't necessarily need to be right near the work. And so, I think that we feel like that's
experience first.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing that came up the other day was like the difference between understanding and comprehending, or the difference between hearing and listening. And, how are these things like, what does that mean exactly? Embody something. So I think when you take out explanatory labels, the viewer does have a possibility of embodying what they're reading or looking at and wondering for themselves, why is this here?
Right. I really like that as a viewer.
Why
that
am I watching
opportunity
this?
of trying to figure out what it's doing in this room. And I don't know. I really like that about this show. I like what you guys have picked, because it's not always immediately obvious. And there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity for me as a viewer to kind of spend some time with that question. So.
And yet someone, a very seasoned art person in Atlanta last night asked me upon coming in, and almost before they moved into the physical space, said, so can you tell me about the show in 2 sentences? And I went, I can't even tell you about a single work in the show in 2 sentences. And part of that's about me being verbose, but the other part of it is about the thing is not sum-upable in that way. I think that was part of what we were insisting, is that the works are not reducible in that here's the soundbite version. There is no soundbite version to the Louise Canvas release. You read it, it works on your emotions, you have an experience.
Yeah.
And that's very different than being able to say in a very carefully crafted, haiku, this is what it is, and now you don't have to think about it anymore. It's not why we do any of this. It's to be able to reduce it to that. And so I think we hope the show forces somebody to realize that, you know, they do know things, they do feel things. These could serve as prompts to some of that, but it also might serve as reminders of all the stuff you kind of don't know, or might like to know, or don't know you want to know yet. You know, you know. Anybody have?
Does anyone have
anybody
any
want to throw a
feedback?
question in?
Because I've had a chance to work as a substitute teacher. And when you walk into a classroom, the figure that you're always concerned about or intrigued about is who's the teacher.
Yeah.
So who's the teacher behind the substitute teacher? And that's the person that has curated this classroom gallery. The students are the artists, and the teacher is the curator for me, and someone that I never really get to know. But I can look at what they put on the walls. Some walls are barren. That tells you something about the curator teacher. Some walls are just complete chaos, where the kids have completely taken over. And so you try to, when you go into a classroom, you read the classroom/gallery walls to really figure out who the teacher is, hopefully understand a little bit about their pedagogy, and then you respond to that.
And how do you respond? Do you end up trying to sort of fall in line with the, like if they're clearly a very sort of iron-fisted teacher, do you go with that, or do you take the opportunity to be the opposite?
What you find sometimes, I think, is a relationship between the classroom that really appears to be very creative. Most of these are art classes, although I may teach other subjects, so that's part of it too. Those classrooms that obviously are very creative and open, the kids are going to be a little bit more unruly and more difficult. Not less intelligent or anything like that, but a little bit more unruly. And those that are very barren, like there's a Catholic school here in Atlanta that just tends to follow a prescribed aesthetic. And very disciplined, very easy to go into because those kids are disciplined. They're wearing uniforms. You know, so there is this kind of thing. And then the average classroom, like in DeKalb County, is somewhat disinteresting. There isn't really that much going on the walls, one way or another. They're hard to read. So you tend to read the behavior of the students, and usually they're bored or they're just not engaged. And that's a sad kind of situation. And you can almost pick up that emotive element when you walk in, the juxtaposition of what you see and what you are observing in the students themselves.
Do you end up subbing for more than a day at a time, or is it like a surgical strike kind of
thing? It depends. You can go in for a week if someone's sick, or who knows, But usually it's a surgical strike.
Yeah. I really do remember, though, this moment of, aha, here's the sub. And like I was saying before, like this sort of, I wonder what we're going to get away with. I wonder if today's going to be a work day or not, was often a question. But then also this sort of renegotiation of the power structure of the classroom, which for those first critical minutes was kind of all laid out. Like, I mean, I'm very curious about how you negotiate that part of that experience, because every kid in the class would be doing that. Be like, what's possible here? And I don't know, maybe to bring it into this art context again, that the opportunity for sort of a renegotiation of the terms is an interesting question with how you curate a show on this topic. So.
I mean, one of the pieces that is easily missed, I think, because it's not obvious, is Pedro Reyes spells out monument. The sculpture spells out monument, but if you walk around it, it also says trembling. So it's an ambigram, and there's different viewpoints in the show that allow you to read the show differently. It happens as well in Lisa Auerbach's piece, where there's something written on the front of the outfit, and then on the back there's the response to the front. And so, we were very cognizant of your body walking around and discovering like the antithesis to what happens in the beginning, and then sort of the opposite might happen in the end, or the different viewpoints and different cross sections that go on. So.
Talk a little bit about language. I mean, it is a funny thing. I mean, we have this show. We've been working on it for quite a while. And I think it was a show that's, when we finally pulled the checklist and the objects together, and this is a nice thing I think to say about this particular show, is that it wasn't exactly the show object-wise that we thought it was going to be. So we sort of went on this sort of like journey, and we wound up finding a lot of work that deals with language in ways that we thought maybe we weren't going to. I mean, we were searching for the diversity of things, and we wanted various kinds of attitudes in the show, but there is a lot of language-based work in the show. And I think every time we found another person or another work by a person, you know, there were any number of things we could have picked by you. We wound up picking those. There were other works by Kamnitzer, by Paul Ramirez-Jonas, by Larry Miller. Any number of them would have worked. You want to say something about this sort of what we wound up with and its relationship to how much text is in there, or?
I mean, you pretty much just said what I would have said, I guess. I don't want to repeat myself language-wise. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a piece in there by Lisa that says, my favorite part about the War on Terror is the language of the War on Terror, and then she makes a list. It's, I guess, you know, I mean, yeah, it's true, like the Daniel Boschkoff is a kind of, you know, language-based Daniel Rohde. I guess if there were an alternate title, it would be, you know, something about language, reading and misreading. I mean, one thing we were talking about earlier at breakfast is when you, the condition of how we're looking at language has to do with, you know, what happens when you learn another language, for instance. All of a sudden, you're very wary of your own language. You become very aware of how you perceive the world through your own language, or how your own language is, I don't know, kind of falls short of description of certain things. Like in Arabic, things are described a certain way. There's no English translation for it. And you're like, why is that? Why is there no English translation for it? Because we don't have that worldview. So that's a huge.
That's, I'm sure if you've ever tried to learn another language, you've had that experience where you're talking to someone in that language and praying that you're actually having the same conversation that they think you're having. Like that kind of moment, like, oh, you know, all the good faith that is sort of hurled at the situation to like, hopefully, you know, you're hopefully really talking and communicating and it's hopefully really making sense. But that, I guess to me, that connects a little bit to this kind of misunderstanding thing I was saying earlier. And that is a situation, that kind of desire for things to make sense situation is something that I've also thought a lot about and made work about through language situations. I did a project with my parents a few years ago who each come from, without getting into the whole long story, but they come from very different parts of the world, have grown up speaking a lot of different languages as a result, and although they've lived in this country for over 40 years, they have accents that are very hard for people to place and which people get very curious about, and which I've never been able to imitate, much to my frustration. So this project was called Accent Elimination, and it was working with a professional accent reduction coach to teach me how to speak like each of them in their accents and to teach them to speak American English, which is it's very confusing to know what that might mean. I mean, you know, English regionally is a million different things, but the process of trying to kind of get a grasp on this incredibly slippery thing of someone's voice and their accent and their English was one of the hardest and most bewildering and interesting things I think I've ever tried to set my mind to do, and for them too. And I mean, what results in this piece is that we actually end up, on one hand, learning a lot about why the other people sound the way they do, the mechanics of their accents. On the other hand, we end up utterly confused, and you can kind of see this as the piece goes on, that, you know, my dad ends up sort of like a deer frozen in the headlights, my mother sort of collapses into laughter, and I become like a little frustrated brat who can't, you know, it's not good enough, like we have to do it again. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think situations where you are trying to learn something and where you begin to fail at the task are actually, I mean, this is maybe back to the idea of the thing I was saying earlier about where uncertainty fits in up against a situation of acquiring knowledge, that I think you learn a lot also by the ways that you screw it up, or the ways in which you, where and how you fail, and how you sort of try to work yourself through that experience.
Sounds like substitute teaching.
Yeah, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's you know, I love the humor embedded in so much of your work, and there's a relationship to Mike Smith's video in the back called Portal Excursion, which we were joking like, oh, that also has a relationship to the psychedelic drug trips. Another portal excursion, this idea of a trip that you make. And so Mike Smith's, you know, attempting to, he's this character at MIT, and he's learning through the process of distance learning that MIT provides, and all the strange double entendres that distance learning has, and it's a very funny piece about this, like, you know, earnest intent to learn, and the kind of, you know, the wall of, I guess, the blockage that could happen, and I don't know. It's really worth watching if you haven't seen this video, because it's actually quite funny and all about I guess the intent to learn as the wrong way to go.
Well, it's a thing that, Dana, yeah?
You've mentioned humor, and I had noticed in walking through, and I had looked at your website previously, and I love the playfulness that you have in your work, and I had recently listened to a lecture about play within learning, and just not just with kids, though. You know, they were saying how important it is, of course, that kids play, and it makes them smarter, and it makes them better problem solvers and all that. But they were, the point of the lecture, the main point was that as adults, if we will continue to play throughout our lives, it makes us smart. You know, it helps with so much in learning and with retention and all of that. And so I just really enjoyed walking through, because this is so much about teaching and learning, yet so many of them have some sort of humorous aspect or playful twist, or, you know, I think much of art, much of successful art does have a little bit of that unexpected. I mean, it could be interpreted as playful. Sometimes it's more poignant than humorous, but yeah, I don't really have a question.
But
Just
some
a comment.
of that's about the hook. And I think this is true about like all good teachers, but maybe also all good artworks, is that there's some sort of hook. I mean, we used to talk to Leon Golub about this, and he says, like, so part of my interest in a lush painting, the surface being, you know, very, very beautiful in a way and aestheticized, was that it was something that the person could kind of luxuriate in before they got to the fact that this was an interrogation scene or an image of some kind of extreme violence. That artworks are often putting up these kinds of faces that become, and humor is always a great one. I think for people who do teach, you know that you're always in this position of how do they like me / trust me, respect me, pay attention to me, and it's often a negotiation of a public persona that is put out there. It's a construction. I mean, it's what's so interesting about Mike Smith's class portraits is that, you know, who is this person? You watch Mike evolve from the 90s through, you know, to the present as a teacher taking his classes to get pictured at Sears. And so that information is obviously telling you Sears is used to photographing families in that kind of setting. And so the classroom is a kind of family. I mean, the class student body is a kind of family. But it is also this strange relationship of the people in the picture to each other, and who is he, and he's suspect, or he's an older student, or he's depending on what he's doing with his, you know, sort of hyperactive eyebrows. One sort of goes, you know, he's the goofy teacher, the lovable teacher, the potentially like worrisome teacher.
The guy who's failing class and repeating the grade. But I think that the kind of more serious, or I don't know, the other strain to his project for me, which I hadn't thought about until this time that I saw it, was that, you know, does he want to fit in? Does he want to be like the students, or does he want to be different from them? And that's something every time I've taught a class, there's a little bit of this. You know, do I want them to like me as a buddy, or do I want them to be a little bit afraid of me? Like, which way will they learn better, you know? Which way will they want to work hard for me? And it's, you know, it's a question of sort of the power structure of the classroom again.
Very true.
And what learning, under what conditions does learning best happen? I mean, I don't know the answer yet.
Could we segue to you talking a little bit about your pieces? Because you have a couple of pieces in the show.
Well, I waited with bated breath to see which pieces these guys would pick, because there were a lot of different things being tossed around, and it was really interesting to kind of watch it get winnowed down. I think as we spoke over breakfast, I realized that all the work that I've contributed here has something to do with rearrangements of language. And just to say a few brief words. The photograph of the books on the wall over there is from a much larger series of about 100-something pictures by now of a project called Assorted Books that I've been doing over many years. And what I do is go into somebody's library. More often than not, it's a personal, a private individual's collection. Sometimes it's a semi-public library. But then by looking at titles on the shelves and taking the interesting titles off the shelves and starting to kind of arrange them around, I'm using the titles of the books to write short sentences with. And by way of doing that, it becomes a kind of cross-sectioning of the library, and I think of it really as a kind of portraiture project. So you get to know something about the person by looking at a few of their books. And the job for me is to find books that on one hand seem very typical of the collection, and on the other hand are sort of the ones where you go, oh my God, I can't believe they have that book. That's weird. And I'm sure most of you admit to having been in someone's home who you're trying to kind of figure out a little bit, and looking to see what books they've got on their shelf, what CDs they have on their thing. If you're really nosy, you open the medicine cabinet, perhaps. I don't usually do that, but I have now and then. Once or twice.
That's a commandment.
Oh, God. Anyway, ways of sort of gleaning through a few fragments, something about a larger situation. So, so that book, that stack, was from a couple in New York who run a literary journal called Shark, and who publish it out of their home. And so there was sort of interesting home office situation with these books. And you see 3 books there that have the title Shark, Shark 1, Shark 2, Shark 3. Those are 3 volumes of the journal Shark. So in the end, the sentence in the book stack reads, a day at the beach, God, I'm not going to remember it now. A day at the beach, the bathers, Shark 1, Shark 2, Shark 3, sudden violence, silence. So it's kind of a shark attack, bad ending story. And so yeah, I mean, in a way, I guess I'm also a little bit looking at the wrong part of the book. I'm not looking at the insides of the book. I'm not looking at the part you're supposed to really read and take seriously. I'm looking at the shell, the outside of the covering, and trying to find more meaning there maybe than might have initially appeared. So that's a way of, it's a little bit like a sort of deliberate misunderstanding of what a book is, perhaps. Quit using us, the photograph on the wall in there of these caterpillars that have also been hijacked to make letter forms that then kind of send a message back out to me. They are part of a larger kind of body of work that I think of as uninvited collaborations with nature that I've been making for a long time now, and they have involved projects where I've repaired broken spider webs, patched up mushrooms that have holes in them using bicycle tire patches, transplanted bug wings from dead bugs onto plants that have missing leaves. There are all these sort of moves where I'm trying to kind of, in some ways, merge two inappropriate materials to kind of fuse them into something else. And I guess the story with that is that one summer I saw a group of caterpillars on a tree outside my window, and they were eating away at the leaves, and I thought, you know, 2 of those would make a really nice mustache. So I took this photograph, a couple different versions of it, where I'm wearing 2 of them as this kind of fuzzy mustache, which was the most disturbing photo shoot I've ever had. They kept trying to crawl up my nose. They were, my mother, who was helping me, finally had this good idea. She said, why don't we put some honey on your upper lip to sort of slow them down? So then we were painting on this honey and glomming these things on, and then they kind of moved a little more slowly.
Being a painter is so much easier, right?
This is why when someone says, what do you make? It's like, oh God, I don't know how to answer that. But then I guess Quit Using Us came from, you know, there are a whole bunch of these caterpillars, and I'd done the mustache pictures, and I thought, you know, it would just be amazing if I could get them to kind of write this message out. And I think the other inquiry here is one that I still make work about this question. I probably will be forever. But what our human relationship to the natural world is really sort of about, or what we want from animals. I think a lot about that. What is it that we want them to give back to us, or want them to show us about ourselves? And I just spent the last 8 years involved in an extensive project about zoos that sort of tries to take this up. But Quit Using Us is, you know, the fantasy in a way is that we can communicate with animals and they'll speak to us. It's a Charlotte's Web kind of moment. But, you know, with the caterpillars, what they're really saying is, leave us the fuck alone. And so what they do when they talk back is kind of, is in some ways, the humor in it for me is that they really aren't that interested in kind of being part of the conversation necessarily. So it's, you know, a tongue-in-cheek kind of message that way. So, but again, a rearrangement of language in a way, a repurposing of something to make meaning out of that never really intended to be meaningful like that. So that's a few words about it.
Which is a perfect sort of setup to.
You rearranged some language to.
Oh, today.
Which is
to a song.
Yeah, so I lead a kind of sub-life as a singer, as a singer-songwriter, musician, and it's actually, music is something that's been part of my life for a very long time, longer than art has, really. I started learning to play instruments and sing way longer ago than I started making art. And there have, in recent years, been more public opportunities to kind of do this now. Regine curated an amazing show in Marfa, Texas, 2 years ago now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That I made a project for called the Marfa Jingles. And Marfa is a small town in West Texas. It's sort of a famous spot on the art world map because the sculptor Donald Judd lived and worked there and brought a lot of his pals to make works there. And it was sort of a place that was known to me, but which I had never gotten anywhere close to, and was a complete outsider to. And so the Marfa Jingles project was the thing that I concocted as a vehicle for helping me get to know this place and to meet people there and to work with people there and to kind of do something that would be both about Marfa, but also which would sort of help me enter Marfa in a way. And so what the project was a call went out for anybody who wanted a jingle to kind of step forward and volunteer themselves. And I ended up writing 10 short songs that are for, you know, the public library or the local grocery store or the Rotary Club got a jingle. The farmers market got a jingle. There were a local travel guide, the newspaper. There were a whole bunch, and the task was to kind of hopefully write a good song, but also really fill it with content that was useful content. I interviewed all the people who volunteered themselves and said, you know, what do you want the song to emphasize? What do you want to be in the song? What information do you want in there? And what musical style do you want it in? And I kind of tried to they were my clients in a way, and I tried to write the song for them. So that's how this jingle thing kind of got started. And so coming here, we thought it would be good if the Contemporary had a jingle. So we had a bunch of emails about this. What should the song be about? What should it emphasize? And then I kind of bashed away at this for a little while. And so, you want to hear it?
Yeah. Yes, don't explain it.
Okay. I should tell you, I wrote this on Thursday night, so it's really new, and I hope I can remember it. I hope I can do this right. It's really very, very fresh. You'll get a very different song if you want a shot of tequila involved. All right, so Stuart told me that the kind of motto here is be contemporary, right? Okay, I might need to cheat. That's all right, I'm just going to stick here in case I flake a lyric. All right. And I caught this cold in Tennessee that hasn't totally gone away. Okay. We present things from the present as we've done throughout the past, but the present's always changing, and it's always changing fast. You might have called us Nexus back in 1973, but today you've gotta call us something more contemporary. Be contemporary. Please join us in the here and now. Don't just dwell on bygone times, all choked up and misty-eyed. Be contemporary, or the present slips away. There are limits to your time span, and no, oh God, I gotta start this one bit again. Okay, sorry. Be contemporary, or the present slips away. There are limits to your time span, and a day when you no longer can be here now. Seize the day, carpe diem, what the heck? today. Eat and drink, go for broke, 'cause tomorrow you might croak. We are very contemporary, but in the very best of ways. The more things keep on changing, the more the very best things stay the same. Be contemporary. We'll get a flawless recording of that once I know the song.
I think you need to make a TV commercial or something to go with that.
That'd be fun. We could shoot a jingle right here.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Anyway, there you go, new jingle.
We have nothing else to say after that. I think one of the great things about teaching, hopefully, is that you know when the class is over. This will be on the test. But I guess we just want to thank you for coming. We'll turn on the technology-based things in the show in a minute. And if this is the first moment that you're here, take time with the works. They are demanding in some cases, funny or not. They take some time to enjoy and get out of them what's there. And we have a lot of very intense programming that goes along with this show. We usually do with all of our projects, as you guys know. But Louise Kamnitzer is going to be here. Mira Shore is going to be here. She's in a book that's just out called The Decade of Negative Thinking. Paul Ramirez Jonas, as mentioned, will be here, and we'll be looking for peers to climb Brasstown Bald with him, so get your hiking boots ready. And any number of other screenings and projects and talks. So all that information is on our spanking new brochure that's on the front desk. And so I would just say thanks for coming, and it's been a pleasure to put the show together and work with Regine. And thank you, Nina, for
fun to be here.
a very special addition to the show and the experience. So I see you, Jennifer, are holding questionnaires. And yeah, so here's a minor test, sticking with the theme, just to give some feedback to us about the programs that we do. And if you like them or want to make questions or comments about what we do here, it helps us a lot with continuing to get funds and support. So thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you to who brought the guitar for us.
Yes, oh yeah.